I spent 42 years living half a life, believing I'd missed my window for real love. Then at 70, in a sun-bleached Oklahoma parking lot, I met Leonard, and everything I thought I knew about timing shattered. Love doesn't have an expiration date. Sometimes it just takes decades to arrive. If this story touches you, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support means everything to us. My name is Arthur Webb, and I turned 70 on a Tuesday in March, alone in my apartment in Norman, Oklahoma. The place smelled like instant coffee and the faint mustiness that creeps into spaces when no one else lives there to notice. I'd lived alone for 6 years by then, ever since Joanne passed. Before that, we'd shared 36 years of marriage, most of them quiet and decent, some of them lonely in ways I didn't know how to name. I loved Joanne. I want to be clear about that. She was kind, patient, fiercely competent at everything she did. We raised no children by choice, hers more than mine, and we built a life that looked right from the outside. She worked as a hospital administrator. I spent 40 years as a senior water resources planner for the state, managing watershed studies and environmental impact assessments across Oklahoma. We had routines, we had respect, we had anniversaries, but I never told her the truth about myself. I'm not sure I even let myself know it fully until she was gone. I grew up in the 1950s in a town where certain things simply weren't spoken. You went to church, you married a woman, you worked hard, you kept your head down. I did all of that. I became good at not asking questions I didn't want answered, and for decades that was enough, or at least it was survivable. Joanne got sick fast. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4 by the time they caught it. She was gone in 5 months. In those final weeks, when I sat beside her hospital bed holding her hand, I kept thinking I should say something, confess something, give her the truth. But what good would it have done? She was dying. I wasn't going to unburden myself at her expense, so I stayed quiet. After she died, I went through the motions. I sorted her clothes, closed accounts, fielded casseroles from neighbors. People told me I'd done right by her. I nodded and thanked them. But inside, I felt like I was disappearing. Norman is a college town, home to the University of Oklahoma, and it has a certain progressive streak that might surprise people who don't know the state. Still, I kept to myself. I was 70 years old. I'd spent my entire adult life hiding. I didn't know how to stop. I retired the year after Joanne passed. My days became shapeless. I'd walk the trails around Lake Thunderbird, buy groceries I barely touched, read books I forgot as soon as I finished them. I told myself this was just what grief looked like, and maybe it was. But it was also something else, loneliness, the kind that's been accumulating for decades. One afternoon in late April, I was sitting in a chain coffee shop on Main Street, staring at a crossword I wasn't solving, when a man about my age sat down at the table next to mine. He had a worn paperback and a cup of black coffee. He didn't look at me, just settled in and started reading. I don't know why I noticed him. Maybe it was the way he held the book, careful and unhurried, like he had nowhere else to be. Maybe it was the silver in his beard, neatly trimmed, or the faint smile that crossed his face as he read. Maybe it was just that I was starving for connection and didn't even know it. He came back the next week. Same table, same black coffee. The third time I nodded at him, he nodded back. The fourth time he said, "You're here a lot." "So are you," I said. He smiled. "Leonard Trask, Arthur Webb." We shook hands. His grip was firm, warm. Something in my chest cracked open just slightly. We started talking. Small things at first. The weather, the crossword, a book he recommended. He told me he'd moved to Norman 2 years earlier from Stillwater, that he'd worked as a licensed geomatics technician for the county before retiring. I told him about water resources planning, about the years I'd spent mapping aquifers and floodplains. It felt easy, easier than anything had felt in a long time. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a routine. Coffee on Thursdays, sometimes Tuesdays too. We talked about everything except the things that mattered most. I didn't ask if he'd been married. He didn't ask about Joanne. We were two old men, polite and careful, circling something neither of us named. Then one Thursday in May, he said, "There's a group that meets on Sunday nights. At the Unitarian church on Chautauqua, it's for well people like us." My stomach dropped. "I've been going a few months," he continued, his voice steady. "It's just coffee and conversation. Nothing formal, but it's nice to not be alone with it." I stared at him, my heart was pounding. "I don't know what you mean," I said. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his expression was so gentle it made my throat tighten. "I think you do," he said quietly. I left without finishing my coffee. I didn't go back to the coffee shop for 2 weeks. I was furious, terrified, ashamed. How dare he assume, how dare he put words to something I'd spent a lifetime burying? But I also couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he'd said it, not with pity or judgment, just with recognition, people like us. On a Sunday night in late May, I drove to the Unitarian church on Chautauqua Avenue. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I parked 3 times before I finally got out of the car. The meeting room was small, plain, with a circle of mismatched chairs and a table with coffee and store-bought cookies. There were maybe 10 people there, all ages, some couples, some alone. Leonard was sitting near the window. When he saw me, his face softened. "I'm glad you came," he said. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded. That night I sat and listened. I heard a woman in her 50s talk about coming out to her adult children. I heard a man in his 30s describe getting disowned by his parents. I heard a couple in their 70s, together for 40 years, talk about finally being able to hold hands in public without fear. And slowly, something in me began to thaw. After the meeting, Leonard walked me to my car. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's all right," he said. "You don't have to know yet." I started going every week. Leonard and I began spending time outside the meetings too. We'd get breakfast at Scratch Kitchen, walk the trails at Sutton Wilderness Park, sit on his porch in the evening and talk. He told me about his marriage, 30 years to a woman named Francine who'd known, somewhere deep down, that he was gay but had never said it aloud. They'd divorced amicably in their 50s. She'd remarried. He'd spent the next 15 years alone, thinking it was too late for him. "Then I realized I'd rather be 70 and honest than 80 and still hiding," he said. I told him about Joanne, about the guilt, about the years of pretending. "You did what you had to do to survive," he said. "That's not something to be ashamed of." But I was ashamed. And I was grieving, not just for Joanne, but for the life I hadn't lived, for the man I might have been if I'd been braver. Leonard didn't try to fix it, he just listened. By the end of June, I knew I was falling in love with him. It terrified me. One evening we were sitting on his porch, watching the sky turn orange over the horizon, and he reached over and took my hand. I froze. "Is this okay?" he asked. I looked down at our hands, his fingers laced through mine, and something inside me finally let go. "Yes," I whispered. He smiled. We sat there until the stars came out. Falling in love at 70 feels different than I imagine it would have at 20 or 30. There's no recklessness, no assumption of endless time. Every moment feels both precious and fragile, like something you're borrowing rather than owning. Leonard and I took things slowly. We didn't rush. We couldn't have, even if we'd wanted to. We were both carrying decades of caution, of fear, of learned silence. Unlearning that doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. In July, I stayed over at his house for the first time. We'd had dinner, grilled chicken and vegetables on his back patio, and we'd talked late into the evening. When I stood to leave, he said, "You could stay if you want." I stayed. We lay beside each other in his bed, not touching at first, just talking in the dark. He told me about the first man he'd ever kissed, a college roommate in 1971 who transferred schools the next semester and never spoken to him again. I told him about a coworker I'd had in my 30s, someone I'd felt drawn to in a way I couldn't name, someone I'd avoided for months until he quit. We've both spent a lot of time running, Leonard said. Yeah, I said. He reached for my hand again. I don't want to run anymore, he said. Me neither. That night we held each other. It wasn't about passion or urgency. It was about presence, about being seen fully for the first time in our lives. I cried. I'm not ashamed to say it. I cried and Leonard held me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 70 years. Safe. By August, we were spending almost every day together. I'd go to his place in the mornings, and we'd have coffee on the porch. We'd run errands, go to the farmer's market on Main Street, cook dinner together. It was domestic and ordinary and completely extraordinary. People noticed, of course. Norman is small enough that two older men spending that much time together doesn't go unnoticed. Most people didn't say anything. A few friends from the support group smiled knowingly when they saw us. One neighbor, a woman in her 80s who lived next door to Leonard, brought us a pie and said, "It's nice to see him happy." But not everyone was kind. One afternoon in late August, we were walking through Andrews Park, just enjoying the weather, when a man in his 40s stopped in front of us. "You two together?" he asked, his tone making it clear it wasn't a friendly question. Leonard's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "We're friends." "Right," the man said, sneering. "Friends," he walked away, muttering something I didn't catch. I felt sick. Leonard took my arm. "Ignore him." "I can't," I said. "I spent my whole life ignoring people like him." "I'm tired, Leonard." "I know," he said. "Me too." We kept walking, but the moment had rattled me. That night I told Leonard I was scared, not of him, not of us, but of the world, of being visible. Of the judgment, the cruelty, the danger. "I'm 70 years old," I said. "I don't know if I have the strength for this." Leonard sat beside me, his hand on my knee. "You do," he said. "You've survived this long by hiding. That took strength too, but this, being yourself, that's a different kind of strength, and you don't have to do it alone." I wanted to believe him. In September, Leonard asked if I'd go with him to visit his daughter, Allison, in Edmond. She was 52, a middle school science teacher, divorced with 2 teenage kids. Leonard had told her about me a few weeks earlier, and she'd invited us both to dinner. I was terrified. "What if she hates me?" I asked. "She won't," Leonard said. "What if she thinks I'm taking advantage of you?" "Arthur," Leonard said, his voice gentle but firm. "She knows who I am, she's known for years, and she wants me to be happy." That's all. We drove to Edmond on a Saturday evening. Allison lived in a small brick house near Mitch Park. She answered the door with a wide smile and hugged Leonard, then turned to me and offered her hand. "You must be Arthur," she said. "I've heard a lot about you." "Good things, I hope," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "All good things," she said. Dinner was easier than I'd expected. Allison's kids, 16-year-old twins named Sophie and Luke, were polite and curious. They asked me about my work, about Norman, about how I'd met their grandfather. I answered as honestly as I could, and they listened without judgment. Afterward, Allison pulled Leonard aside, and I saw them talking quietly in the kitchen. When they came back, she hugged him again, and I saw her whisper something in his ear. He nodded, his eyes wet. On the drive home, I asked him what she'd said. "She said she's glad I found you," Leonard said, "and that I deserve to be loved." I reached over and took his hand. By October, I'd started thinking about the future in a way I hadn't in years. Leonard and I talked about traveling, maybe taking a road trip to Colorado or New Mexico in the spring. We talked about selling one of our places and moving in together, though neither of us was ready to make that leap yet. Mostly, we just talked about being together. About building something, even at this stage of life. But there were still hard days. One night in November, I woke up at 2 in the morning in Leonard's bed, gasping for air. I'd had a nightmare about Joanne, about her lying in that hospital bed, staring at me with accusation in her eyes. Leonard woke up and held me while I cried. "I betrayed her," I said. "I lied to her for 36 years. "You survived," Leonard said. "That's not the same as betrayal. It feels like it." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Arthur, you can't undo the past." None of us can, but you can choose what you do now. You can choose to live honestly, to love honestly. That's not betraying Joanne, that's honoring the life you have left. I wanted to believe him. Some days I did. Other days the guilt was overwhelming, but Leonard stayed. He stayed through the nightmares, the shame, the fear. He stayed because he understood, because he'd lived it too. In early December, we went to a holiday party hosted by the support group. It was at someone's house in Moore, just south of Norman, and there were maybe 30 people there, all ages, all stories. I stood in the corner with a cup of cider, watching Leonard talk to a younger couple, his face animated and warm. A woman in her 60s approached me. Her name was Iris, and I'd seen her at meetings but never talked to her much. "You two are good together," she said. "Thank you," I said. "I lost my partner 3 years ago," she said. "Cancer." We had 22 years together, but we couldn't be open about it. Not with our families, not with most of our friends. I spent those years loving her in secret, and I don't regret a single moment. But I do regret the hiding. She looked at me, her eyes kind but serious. "You have a chance to live differently," she said. "Don't waste it." I thought about that a lot in the days that followed. On Christmas Eve, Leonard and I exchanged gifts in his living room. I gave him a book of poems by Mary Oliver, one I'd seen him admiring at a bookstore. He gave me a framed photo of the two of us, taken by Allison at that dinner in Edmond. In it, we're sitting on her porch, laughing about something I can't remember, and we look happy. We look like us. "I love you," Leonard said. It was the first time either of us had said it out loud. "I love you too," I said. We spent the night together, talking and holding each other, and for the first time in my life I felt whole. But 2 days later, everything changed. Leonard called me early in the morning, his voice tight. "I need you to come over," he said. When I got there, he was sitting at the kitchen table, pale and shaking. There was a letter in front of him. "What happened?" I asked. He handed me the letter. It was from his son, Garrett, who lived in Tulsa. Garrett was 48, worked in sales, and had always been distant with Leonard, even before Leonard came out. The letter was short, brutal. It said that Garrett wanted nothing to do with him anymore, that he was disgusted by Leonard's choices, that he didn't want his own children exposed to that lifestyle. Leonard was crying. I held him, and I didn't know what to say. Because what do you say when someone you love is being rejected by their own child? The weeks after Garrett's letter were some of the hardest we'd faced. Leonard tried to be strong, tried to brush it off, but I saw the way it gutted him. He'd call Garrett and get sent to voicemail. He'd text and get no response. It was like watching someone grieve a death, except the person was still alive, just choosing to be gone. I didn't know how to help. I could only be there. One evening in mid-January, Leonard and I were sitting in his living room, the television on but neither of us watching it, when he said, "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "This," he said, gesturing between us, "being honest, being out, losing people because of it." I thought about it for a long time before I answered. "Yeah," I said, "I wonder." But then I think about the alternative. Going back to hiding, going back to being alone, and I can't do that anymore, Leonard, I can't. He nodded slowly. "Me neither," he said. We sat in silence for a while, and then he leaned his head on my shoulder. "I'm glad I have you," he said. "I'm glad I have you too." In February, we decided to take that road trip we talked about. We drove to Santa Fe, New Mexico, staying in small motels along the way, stopping at roadside diners and state parks. It wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey. About being together, away from Norman, away from the weight of everything. One night, we stayed in a little inn outside Amarillo. The room had a window that looked out over the plains, and we lay in bed watching the sky turn deep purple as the sun set. "I never thought I'd have this," Leonard said quietly. "Me neither," I said. "I spent so many years thinking I'd die alone," he continued, "thinking I'd missed my chance. And now here I am, 72 years old, lying next to someone I love, and it feels like a miracle." I turned to him and I saw tears in his eyes. "It is a miracle," I said. We held each other and I felt a kind of peace I'd never known before. When we got back to Norman in early March, something had shifted. We'd survived the hard winter, the rejection, the fear. And we were still here, still together. Leonard brought up the idea of moving in together again, and this time I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said. "Let's do it." We decided to keep his place since it was bigger, and I put my apartment up for sale. It felt strange, packing up a space I'd lived in for 6 years, but it also felt right. I wasn't losing anything. I was gaining everything. In April, I moved in. It was a quiet, ordinary day. Leonard helped me carry boxes from the truck, and we spent the afternoon unpacking, finding places for my books and clothes and kitchen supplies. That night, we made dinner together in our kitchen, and we ate at our table, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. A few weeks later, we got a letter from Garrett. Leonard opened it with shaking hands, and I stood beside him, reading over his shoulder. It was short. It said that Garrett had been talking to a therapist, that he was working through some things, and that he wasn't ready to reconcile yet, but he wanted Leonard to know he was trying. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't acceptance, but it was something. Leonard cried and I held him and I told him it was okay to hope. In May, we went to Allison's house for her birthday. Sophie and Luke were there, along with a few of Allison's friends. It was warm and loud and full of life. At one point, Sophie pulled me aside and said, "I'm really glad you're part of our family." I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her. That night driving home, Leonard said, "I never thought I'd get to have this, a partner, a family that accepts us. I thought I'd lost that chance." "You didn't lose it," I said. "It just took longer to find." He smiled. In June, we went back to the support group and shared our story. I talked about the years of hiding, the grief, the fear. Leonard talked about his divorce, his son's rejection, his decision to live openly. And then we talked about finding each other. "We're proof that it's never too late," Leonard said. "That love doesn't have an expiration date." People clapped, and a few people cried, and afterward a man in his 80s came up to us and said, "Thank you." I needed to hear that. By July, we'd settled into a rhythm. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our quiet evenings on the porch. We had hard days too, days when the past crept in, when the world felt hostile, when we were tired of fighting just to exist. But we had each other. One evening in late summer, we were sitting outside, watching the sun set over the neighborhood, and Leonard turned to me and said, "Do you have any regrets?" I thought about it. "I regret the years I lost," I said. "The life I didn't get to live, but I don't regret this. I don't regret us." "Me neither," he said. He reached over and took my hand, and we sat there in the fading light, two old men who'd spent most of their lives hiding, finally free. I'm 71 now. Leonard is 73. We don't know how many years we have left. None of us do, but we're not wasting the ones we have. We're traveling when we can. We're spending time with Allison and the kids. We're showing up to the support group, being visible, being honest. We're living. People ask me sometimes if I wish I'd done this sooner. If I wish I'd come out decades ago, lived openly, found love earlier. And the truth is, yes, I do wish that. I wish I'd had the courage I have now when I was 20 or 30 or 50. I wish I'd been braver, but I also know that I did the best I could with what I had. I survived. And survival in its own way is a kind of bravery. Now I get to do more than survive. I get to live. I get to love, I get to be myself, and that's worth everything. Leonard and I are planning another trip, this time to the Pacific Northwest. We want to see the coast, the redwoods, the mountains. We want to keep exploring, keep experiencing, keep building a life together. Because love doesn't have an expiration date. It doesn't matter if you're 70 or 80 or 90. It doesn't matter if you've spent most of your life hiding or hurting or alone. It's never too late to be honest. It's never too late to be yourself. It's never too late to find love. Leonard taught me that, and every day I wake up beside him, I'm grateful, grateful for the life we're building. Grateful for the courage it took to get here. Grateful for the time we have left, however much that is. We're proof that it's never too late, that love can find you even at 70. That you can spend most of your life in hiding and still step into the light. I spent 42 years living half a life, and I thought that was all I'd ever get, but I was wrong. Because here I am, 71 years old, sitting on a porch in Norman, Oklahoma, holding hands with the man I love, watching the sun set over a life I never thought I'd have. And it's beautiful. It's messy and complicated and sometimes